Billy, the Red Wings offseason has been surprisingly eventful. Not something we can always say here in Detroit. Today, I would like to take a trip down the timeline of this offseason and assess exactly how we felt going in and coming out of every major event. But before we jump into the offseason, let's take a moment to remember exactly how we were feeling coming out of the regular season. I know you put together a summary for that.
Yeah, so the overall feeling that I had on the Detroit Red Wings last year was positive. There were signs of good, there were signs of bad. If we're looking at some signs of good, the Rasmussen growth, the Bergeron emergence, Wallman-Seider combo definitely popped off for us. Mata really came into his own, and even players like Kubalik found like a big role on this roster. Some of the signs of the bad, Raymond with a sophomore slump, Husso really struggled at being a full-time starter in the NHL. Zadina and Veleno, can you call them bust? I'm just about there. We saw that no one else in the league wanted Zadina. I've got a feeling no one else in the league wants Veleno too. Kosa, if we're diving real deep, Kosa not starting in the AHL concerns me a little bit. Having to go to the ECHL, it doesn't hit me right. Doesn't hit me right yet. Maybe this next year you can pop off and do better, but it is a sign of bad to me. And we were injury riddled. Again, Fabry was injured. Rasmussen got injured, but again, who in the NHL isn't? And
Yeah, at this point, being injury riddled is part of something you got to plan for at this point.
the big highlight of the year, I think, was our series at Ottawa. It was extremely deflating to any exciting momentum or playoff chase that we had. We were in a playoff spot for a little while. We had the 8th spot. We had games in hand. We had so much excitement. And
The Red Wing flags were in the car windows for about 40 hours, and then instantaneously the Senators put us right back to where we were supposed to be.
Yeah, and in that series, we just looked so weak. We lacked physicality. We were unprepared. We are outclassed across the board. Ottawa was the better team that weekend. It showed, and that ultimately led to us selling at the deadline. I know Steve said he was probably going to sell either way. I'm not sure if I'm buying that. I think if you come out of that series 2-0 and, you really put it to the Senators and you're popping off and your team's feeling themselves, I don't think the next move comes. I think he has to say that for himself,
You beat the Senators. Now the Senators are selling. We do the DeBrincat trade. Then I'm just
Getting a little ahead of ourselves now. But for the trades that we did make, we did sell Burt off to Boston and we did sell Hronik off to Vancouver. And I was very pleasantly surprised at the return that we got. I already all season, Josh, you and I were already getting into a little bit on how much do you sign Bertuzzi back for? And I was like, you don't. So seeing him get traded over to Boston for a first was a big surprise, happy surprise for me.
especially for the return. You can't complain about that return, especially because we know what he turns into later in this video. So the next event that happened was the draft. But before we actually jump into the draft, this is where I want to throw it to you guys. As you guys know, at this point, we answer just about every single comment you guys throw on these videos. We love having the discussion with you. So go on down there and let us know at this point, when you were going into the offseason, what was your mental state on the Red Wings? What were you thinking going from end of season into offseason? What were you hoping for? What was your expectation? And then maybe follow it up with what you feel now compared to then. Throw the conversation down there. We're going to continue the conversation there and in the Discord, but we'll jump right into the draft. Now, I know you and I both went into the draft. I think we were on the same page where we had so many first round and second round picks. It just felt like the perfect storm for a Steve Yzerman to go and turn some of those picks into a big return. We looked and saw that we had 3 picks in the second round, back to back to back. And we're like, there's no shot Steve's going to draft 3 players in a row in the second round. Turns out we were right, but only because he traded down the last pick. When all 3 of those picks, not even just all 3 of those picks, considering that there was so much hype around some potential trades at the time, when the entire first round went through and we made both of our first round picks, our 2 arguably most valuable assets that we have to just trade, we retained it and we used it on a player. The immediate feeling I know on my end was underwhelmed, a little disappointed. I really thought this was the point where we had the extra to spend and this is what we were going to spend. And so to walk out of that just drafting and then going into the second round and still just drafting, it felt like we were just adding more to a system that was already filled with potential and filled with a bunch of names that were already clawing for ice time, to the point where it was tough to give everybody an opportunity.
Yes.
Is that about where you were with me?
Yeah, I know that we were hearing more rumblings about DeBrincat, but I also know that Pierre Dorian out of Ottawa had already said that he was not expecting a first round pick that year involved in the trade for DeBrincat. So it was a give and take for us. We didn't see the trade happen, but we also heard news that it's not done yet. So like we still had this little clamor of hope, but you start seeing like these names that you're getting really excited about, like Soderblom, Casper, Mazur, Lombardi, Edvinsson, just to name like the cream of the crop in our system. Where are they going to go? Like it kind of felt like we were going back a little bit to Ken Holland days, but I was by no means pushing any sort of like hot seat button. And I know that was a conversation starting to go up across Detroit, specifically on our radio stations. They loved poking that bear. I was very much in my car throwing my hands up as I'm driving, like, what are you guys talking about?
And we know some of you know exactly what we're talking about. YouTube tells us that a lot of you watched 97.1 and watched Valenti. So I'm sure you were feeling like we were when we heard them just be like, what's Yzerman doing? Why aren't we doing something? We weren't to that point, but we were definitely, I should, this is where I'll stop saying we, because we actually had this conversation in a previous video when we were talking about this, and this was before a lot of the offseason actions happened, is I was getting to the point where I was nowhere close to an Yzerman hot seat situation, but I was off of my Yzerman can do no wrong and I won't question anything phase. I was starting to enter into a phase where I'm starting to look a little more critically on how he's building the team. Not necessarily, a difference between questioning, but now I'm analyzing it for myself instead of being like, if Yzerman did it, it must be good, which is what I think a lot of us were. When after you see what the man did in Tampa, it's pretty tough not to just feel that way with everything he's doing with your team. So I was starting at this point as we left the draft to not be concerned, but I'm definitely paying more attention and I'm no longer blindly trusting. Where were you when we were walking out of the draft?
I was definitely still more in the zone of Steve and just kind of like trusting in it and kind of seeing the reasons why he's doing what he's doing, kind of coming up with the excuse in my head, I guess, of, yeah, if the move isn't there, the move isn't there. It's not just that Steve Yzerman does something. You need another party involved to make the trades happen. And when I saw that none of them happened league wide, I suddenly was like, hey, like, if no one's talking, no one's looking to deal right now, I'm not going to hold Steve to why didn't you make the deal? Why didn't you make the move? That was like me, I guess, coping a little bit with it. And I think the biggest concern I had through the offseason was actually when we traded for Yamamoto and Kostin.
That was such a short-term high. It felt like the Wings had made like this spectacular deal just based on the relationship with Ken Holland.
Yep.
And then, sorry, I cut you off. You can
you're fine.
Walk us through what happened with that.
Yeah, so, we trade over future considerations for a middle six forward and a forward that just needs a better opportunity, a change of scenery. The rumors that he was going in the KHL, saw it as a complete win. But I did see the shortcomings of Yamamoto, even though I am a fan of him. And I thought, we need some goal scoring. We need a skilled player, kind of fits in, but again, our team does feel kind of small at that point. And the next thing we know, we're buying out Yamamoto. And I'm like, oh, we did have cap space. Okay, so we were just kind of a cap dump. Well, what about Kostin?
That was the future consideration at that point.
Yep.
If you were wondering, the future consideration was that we were going to do the buyout for Ken. Yep. So Ken doesn't have to take on that money. Steve was fine taking on that money. And in exchange, we were getting the rights to re-sign Kostin.
Yep. And that's when I think you and I dove a little more into him, the kind of player he is, and the physicality that he brings, and the goal scoring potential down in the lineup, being the bigger guy with a heavy shot. Yeah, I feel like it absolutely just fit a need. And we kind of just paid Yamamoto's buy off in the contract on Kostin as well. And it ended up all being fine. So again, anytime that Steve has provided us with a moment of, it almost immediately turns into, oh, okay, that's good. This is only good.
That's a good way to put it, actually. Like, there's been constant feelings of what exactly, and then immediately followed by, okay, that's what. Okay, now it's starting to come together. I get it.
Yeah, and not
it's that in between part that people, myself included, you get stuck on for a bit. You're like, well, hold on now. I don't know about this one, but.
And
Okay.
the biggest like failures Steve has, I can't even say are like Steve failures. I look at Ned and I look at Vrana, and I just straight up cannot hold Steve responsible for how either one of those turned out. You're taking a coin flip on a goalie, was a Calder candidate at one point in his career, had every signs, trading a third over for him was great. And then again in the Mantha trade to get Vrana, guys, like I'm just going to point out, we did the math. Vrana played 42 games for us. I believe he scored 22 goals. He was on pace for like over 40 goals with us. That's the second time, for anyone who can go back real quick. I know I'm throwing this way back. Johan Franzen was supposed to be our 40 goal scorer. He had the concussions. Vrana is supposed to be our 40 goal scorer. Has his off the ice issues. Things just don't go right for the Red Wings getting 40 goal scorers.
That's not what you want to hear right now.
Cross fingers.
With recent acquisitions.
Yes.
And speaking of recent acquisitions, let's jump into the next phase of the offseason, the free agency. Now, when free agency approached, I was excited. I was excited because free agency usually means, there's big names out there. You never know who you can get. And then Billy immediately just completely ruined my dreams and pointed out that this was not going to be that strong of a free agency pool. That was your take.
Yep.
And I looked at it too, and I agreed with you.
Yeah, in general, it was a weak free agency, and I think you saw it reflected across the league. The biggest things that happened were trades. The Pierre-Luc Dubois trade.
Oh, it's so good.
Whoa. The Pierre-Luc Dubois trade over to LA out of Winnipeg was one of the biggest things. And the Red Wings had some relatively simple needs going into that time period. I had it listed as a backup goalie, some third line D-men to get out Osterley and Hag, and some goal scoring. And I put goal scoring at the bottom because it would have to be risky signs. It wouldn't be like a home run signing available out there.
There weren't just 35, 40 goal scorers just hanging around looking for new teams. This just doesn't really happen that often, it feels like.
But there was one looking for a trade. Josh, there was one looking for one out of Ottawa, and he wanted to come home. He wanted to come back to Detroit. And Steve Yzerman, I won't even use the word shocked because everyone just kind of saw it coming after a while. All the reports were like, DeBrincat's only going to Detroit. Like, he only wants to go to Detroit. He doesn't want to sign long-term with anyone else. We even said in our video, yeah, sounds like no other team wants to take the headache of trying to get him to sign long-term anywhere, so no one's going to pay the price. And we end up paying the first that we actually got for Bert, a 24 fourth. Kubalik that we signed as a free agent did really well for us, and Sabrango. And it addressed our biggest need in that moment. We signed him at under $8 million. It was an absolute home run swing for Steve Yzerman. It was the kind of like the cap of the entire offseason for us. And that kind of leaves us with what I'm going to define as 4 different levels of signings. And I know we graded them before, and I think I'm going to stay pretty consistent with this at this point. But our great signing, great move is DeBrincat. I'm not going to call it, elite. He still has to prove himself. He's still plenty young. Needs to fit into a system, change of scenery, all those different things.
I don't think anybody realistically predicted not only that we were going to get DeBrincat, but that we were going to get him at a value like that. Yep. And at terms like that, for years like that. It was so unexpected. And then if you remember when we were talking about, we did our video on what's holding this trade back or what could the trade look like, we were throwing out a lot of names that did not get moved. I mean, the Kubalik one was definitely in the mix, but not at any point was Kubalik listed in our conversations as the main piece, like the main player. It was always involving, like, they're going to want Bergeron. They're going to want like an Edvinsson. They might want like a Raymond. To walk out of that, losing the conditional first, Kubalik as your main, and then a Sabrango who knows if they had a future on this team. And then get the contract that you did. That's nothing short of a great signing. And it's tough to make the argument any other way. But then we also had some good signings, some signings that some people I'm sure are going to have their opinions, but we brought in Comfort. We brought in Sprong, who I feel like without our research, we would have had as a fine signing. And then we looked into him, and again, if it's not your first day here, you've heard that. Just go watch some Sprong videos. He's a goal creator, not just a goal scorer. He makes plays happen. And then I think one of the last ones was Gostisbehere.
Yeah, that was surprising.
That just solid contributions to the team.
I think Gosberg takes it as the surprise signing for me for Steve Yzerman. I don't think anyone had rumors linked to him in Detroit. I don't think we were looking at him in Detroit. I thought that he was going to go to a more stronger contender, and we signed him at a great contract that, I mean, if things go poorly this season, you can dip him off and a team will want him for a push. And then you can kind of look at probably the most widely across the league criticized signing in Justin Hall. And I'm pretty fine with it. I don't think it's great. I don't think it's bad. I think it's just a signing, and I think it's going to make the team better. So it's fine to me.
Yeah, we did our video of the breakout players of the year, and that was the one we kicked off the list with, where just the change of scenery, not just scenery, but the change of role, the change of expectation on the team,
organizational values.
It could completely alter the way we look back at this signing.
Yep.
Because the first thing you see is the money. Everybody saw the money.
10 mil.
And
it's over 3 years.
Right. That signing didn't prevent us from doing anything. Yzerman did everything he was going to do, and it sounded like this was just what needed to be done to get a premium player in terms of handedness, because a right-handed defenseman is just tough to come by. So it sounds like Yzerman just wanted to get this done. Just get him on the team. Probably paid more than he would have normally wanted to, I'm sure, but made sure to get the deal done and wanted him on the team. So it would have to be a pretty bad performance for us to look back and change our rating on that one. And then there was, some signings that you just kind of go, all right, I guess we'll see what happens. These could be signings that mean nothing.
Yep.
Or they could, they are at least, two of them are goalies. You got Reimer, Lyon, both signed, where you're just hoping one of them emerges as your, solid backup. And if it happens, cool. We may forget Lyon was even signed a year from now. Maybe it doesn't work out. He's either sent down or released or waived or something if he just doesn't pan out. Same with Reimer, but one of these could emerge as your solid backup. And Yzerman has had no issues with just taking stabs at goalies. Just keep trying, because as we've talked about in the past, you have no idea with goalies anymore, man. They could be bad for 3 years and then put up a Vezina performance. They could be bad for most of the season and carry a team to the finals. I think Yzerman's just kind of like, just keep bringing in a new goalie, and at some point the stars are gonna align and it's just gonna work.
Yep. I'm just saying, if you're flipping a coin looking to get heads, wouldn't you rather flip 2 coins? That's
there you go.
Steve Yzerman did this offseason. Okay, you got 2 coins to flip as the backup goaltender, barring injuries in there as well. And the last player we had on our hopeful list, and it, again, was a relatively surprising one to us, was Fisher. I'm not sure where he's going to fit in this system. I don't know if he's like a daily scratch option, kind of just going to plug in wherever he can kind of fit him. We don't seem to know too much about him. It's just, again, let's get a guy into our system, get an NHL caliber player that hopefully later in this season applies some level of value to us, instead of having to call up someone who has little NHL experience with where we hope to be.
So that brings us to looking to the future. That brings us to looking at the next season with what Yzerman's put together. What are expectations? What are realistic expectations? And, which it's getting pretty consistent with how we do things here. We're going to kind of tier this a little bit, and we're going to,
we're my tiers, man.
we're going to give you our low end expectations all the way up to exceeding our expectations. And I mean, starting with the low end, it's the bare minimum of just be better than you were last year.
Yep.
That's your low bar expectation. All right. So don't take this as the full expectation, but at a minimum, be better than you were the year before. So a winning record, win more games than you lose. We have noted the goal differential improvement, with how rare and how seemingly impossible it is to be considered a good team or make the playoffs if the other team's scoring more than you. Correct the goal differential. Just a couple of basic low tier goals that would at least show a sign, even if we're not full sail. You know what I mean? We're heading in the right direction. The current's taking us in the right direction. That's on the low end.
And to give Steve Yzerman his credit really quick on it, every year we have gotten better with Steve Yzerman. I believe we hit one real low, and every season since then it has gotten little by little better. And this offseason feels like we have made the moves that the low end should be just be better. And what I'm going to label as our mid end is to just play meaningful hockey games towards the end of the season. Be in the playoff chase with 4-5 games to go. You know, you're counting down the points. You're saying Pittsburgh plays these 3 teams. You know, we see them going 2-1. I mean, they're going to get 4 points out of that. We're 2 points behind, but we have 4 games. We need to win 3 out of the 4 to tie. Like, get into those scenarios, get into those conversations.
So mid expectation is take that Ottawa weekend and make it like a month long. Yes. Something like that. Like take how we felt for like a day or two and just make that the last month of the season. Have meaningful games all the way through to the end, to the point where if you do miss the playoffs, you just miss it. And we had a few weeks of exciting, you know, playoff, you know how they say playoff hockey. When you're in those last few games and you're trying to make the playoffs, you get that playoff atmosphere. Give us some of that. I'd like to go to one of those games. I want to go to that, you know, the arena's starting to fill up. We're fighting for a playoff spot atmosphere. That feels like a fair mid expectation.
And I think we have the guys on this roster to get our team prepared for that this time around. I'm looking at Perron. I'm looking at Sherratt. Get the boys ready. You have Reimer. Reimer's been around this league forever. If Husso needs some level of like that back end, like securing thing, I know we're getting maybe a little into the roster a little too much here, so I'll stop. But like, we have the roster that create the playoff atmosphere in the locker room, get it going. Lalonde's been around the playoffs plenty. Like, I would not accept another weekend breakdown against another team missing the playoffs in a playoff run. That would deflate me really, really badly. Then moving on to the high end of things, I think it would just be just like securing that spot, being the team that teams are then chasing, and you have the wiggle room. You have the 3 games in hand, as well as like 2 or 3 points. You're saying, hey, as long as we keep going out here, it's similar to what the Red Wings had too early in the race last year, but you're securing that 7th or 8th spot, and you're watching a couple teams below you really hammer it out for the last one. And on top of that, when you make the playoffs, remain competitive. Going in and getting swept, worthless to me. It's good to get the playoff experience, they can say, but if your playoff experience is just getting your ass handed to you, I guess you could make the argument it's going to light a fire under you. But I think that it's pretty deflating to an entire locker room of, you know, we fought so hard for so long, we made the playoffs and we're done. And now we're looking at some contracts ending, and we're going to lose some of the core guys to this team. We saw how much like losing Burt meant to the team last year, and who knows what that means going forward. Just remain competitive in the series, make it a 6-game series, just win a couple games, because you're likely going against someone like Carolina, you know, New Jersey, potentially even a Tampa makes their way up there. I want you to remain competitive, and then to exceed that. Again, this is what I would say is the very top end for this team, barring miracles, right? Reimer comes out, has Vezina level play. Husso takes the back seat. DeBrincat's putting in 50 goals. Like, those are like that next level. I would say securing the 6th seed would be the absolute highest end reasonable expectation for this team. No longer battling for this.
6 would put you top 3 in the division then, right? Yes. That's how the playoff format is now. So basically you're saying not being a wild card team would be exceeding. Okay.
Yep. I think if that's what this roster is able to bring together and put on the ice, it's great. And win a playoff series at that point. Yeah, compete with them. It's 7 games, NHL playoffs. Anything happens, right? That's what everyone says. You had the Panthers who went to the Stanley Cup Finals. They faced the greatest team ever. So yeah, like exceeding these expectations would be do that. Last year,
it's what we've been itching for as Red Wings fans for a long time. The 2010s were a rough time, really rough time. The beginning of it was, you know, where we're just kind of bleeding out, and we're kind of like, all right, just end it. Let's just try to rebuild this. And we waited so long that this has been a tough period. And honestly, just hosting a playoff game, being there, having our first playoff game at LCA, I feel like would be just such a strong injection of morale to a fan base that just needs it.
Yes.
It just needs it at this point. At this point, it's no longer, you know, the spoiled Red Wings fan. Like, it's not like we were good for so long and then is immediately like, oh, why aren't we good again? We've been through it at this point. We're
through the ringer.
The nights of the draft lottery making this take even longer.
Come on, man, why'd you have to say that?
This is just what we need. I really am really shooting for that mid end to high end that we've listed, where I just want to just get us in the playoffs, barely make it if you have to. It would be such a morale boost for this fan base. And I feel like it would show that the Wings are back, or they're coming, like you can't, like it's done. Like this Dead Wing 2.0 is done.
Because if you do that at this stage in your rebuild, the future is just so much brighter, right?
It's convincing to free agents.
Yep.
It's convincing to free agents as well. I know we have one more portion that we want to hit, but before we do, I kind of thought of something while we were talking about these expectations. Last season, we saw Yzerman hit a point to sell after the Ottawa series. Where do you think we have to be on this expectation scale that we've listed to avoid not just a general should we sell? Would the general GM sell? Where do you think we have to be for Steve Yzerman to be bought in to the point where he might consider buying?
That's an interesting one.
Right? Because the sell is an easy question. If he's not sure if we're barely in the mid or we're barely in the chase, Yzerman's probably going to exert that patience and be like, okay, you know what? Then it's not our year. Let's swing it back around and let's swing harder next year. Where do we have to be that we surpass an Yzerman standing where he is and actually get Yzerman to sit up in his chair and go, let's take a shot at this thing?
I want to say the easy answer, and I know it's probably going to be what a lot of people think right off the bat, is go beat Ottawa. Put yourself in that same position, go beat Ottawa. I think it's got to be higher. I think it has to be higher than that. I think you have to have a weekend run with Toronto at that point. I think you have to have someone that's, locking in that 2 or 3 slot out of the Atlantic. And I think there's going to be a lot of evaluation through the entire season into what is weak on this team. Is Justin Hall not working out? Is Mata having a slump year? Is it something, lacking on our offensive end? Is it our backup goaltender? Are our backup goaltenders, let's say at this point in the season, let's say they've played 22 games. Are they 8-14? Are they 7-15? Is it that is an issue kind of deal? Or is that kind of like our strong suit and you think we need offense? I think it's hard to paint the scenario because of how many variables there can be in it. If you made me paint the scenario, I think it will be the backup goaltenders. That's why I brought it up. I think that's like the easy one to look at. And to be that buyer, I wanted to look at some options for us. This might be, the overhype, looking way too early, and just kind of following some rumors. And the way I broke this down, it's some trade opportunities for Steve Yzerman at the trade deadline. We're predicting teams that are probably going to underperform, miss the playoffs, an aging player that I don't believe they would be too interested in re-signing, or they don't want to re-sign with their team, and the expiring contract. Those are all the criteria that all of these following people meet. And I'm going to put it down my value of like most to least, I guess, through every category. And it's going to start with goaltending. And I know I mentioned him earlier, and I know I mentioned him as like an off-season possible acquisition. But the more I think about it, that's not the Steve Yzerman way. He's not willing to pay full price. He's going to wait for that perfect storm, right? There are a few teams I think that are going to do pretty poorly out of the West. And that would be the Winnipeg Jets and the Minnesota Wild. 2 names on those teams of aging goalies, final year of their contract, probably are either going to retire or not re-sign with their team. Connor Hellebuyck, Marc-Andre Fleury. I know Fleury is probably going to hit a lot of Wings fans like, who? Wait, what? He's so old. If you watch him play, he's still fine. I'm not going to say he's great. I'm not going to say he's Hellebuyck, but if you're making that, push for the playoffs, I think he would be the absolute ideal, either 50-50 or backup guy on your roster. And if you're looking for someone younger, it's Carter Hart out of Philly. Philly has already started their fire sale of everything. There are already rumors of him being traded this offseason. Maybe teams are not willing to, like we said, goalies are a complete coin flip on how they're going to do that year. Maybe it's too early to buy in on Carter Hart. So you're going to wait and you're going to try to see what you can get for him at a trade deadline instead. And maybe Philly is going to sell him high.
A lot of this also hinges on how does Husso do this year?
Yeah.
You don't know if you're shopping for a backup or a replacement. So if the rest of the team's looking good and we're losing games because we have shaky goaltending, you might see a swing. You might see a swing at a Hellebuyck and try to acquire a starter and put Husso in a less prominent role. It's, again, we're deep in the hypotheticals at this point, but it could be either way. I mean, if those players are available, there sounds like there's going to be some available for each role. So that's good to at least know that if it's needed, it might be out there.
And to just transition over to some D-men, so maybe injuries hit us, maybe they plague us pretty hard on the back end, and maybe it comes down to that trade deadline, you need that guy. I'm looking specifically at the Calgary Flames. I believe they have 5 expiring contracts on their defensemen. Something tells me not all 5 are getting signed, and something tells me Calgary's not going to bounce back after last year. They were the only team to not make the playoffs with a positive goal differential, but it feels like Markstrom's slowing down. It kind of feels like the entire organization's slowing down. So I'm looking at like Hanifin, Lindholm, Zadorov off those rosters. Those are 3 that I would like on our team. You can look at I believe he's on Vancouver right now, Tyler Myers. I don't believe Vancouver's going to do well either. He's a big body. And Washington with Edmondson. I believe all of these guys play a relatively similar role and all would have a spot on this roster at that point if things are going poorly with the defense. So again, they just meet that criteria. And my least likely scenario, maybe this is me just being way too hopeful in our forwards and just knowing the depth that we have in our system, that we aren't likely to go off and pay big for one of these guys at a deadline. It's more likely a Soderblom, a Casper, a Fisher are going to find their way into lineup. If we have 4 injuries next year, like, you know, really long-term ones, I think we can strike it up to injury-riddled season beyond like a reasonable doubt.
If we find ourselves in a position where we're looking to buy forwards, where either there was a lot of underperforming or we got hit with injuries, I don't see a good scenario where we find ourselves trying to buy a forward. I hope that's not the scenario because that probably means bad news.
Yeah. But if you want some names, guys, I'm looking at Silverberg out of Anaheim, Tyler Johnson out of Chicago, Pacioretty out of Washington, Chandler Stevenson. Like, these are all names that could get here. Pacioretty's only on $2 million. If Washington's severely underperforming, he's got the playoff experience. He's got goal scoring touch. Like, could fit in. I don't know. Maybe he does bump someone out at the right cost at a trade deadline. If Washington's willing to, you know, give him up for a 6th, then no one else is looking to take Pacioretty on for a 6th round pick. I think a lot of people would, but it's possibilities. It's scenarios, people that I would expect to be in the trade deadline talk simply because of the team they're on, where they are in their career.
I think if there's one thing every Red Wings fan can agree on, this year has a high potential of being that first big step year back to being the old Red Wings.
Yeah.
Don't forget to subscribe.